We're live and we're back with a day filled with incredible conversations around films that people have spent years crafting for our engagement, entertainment if needed. But this particular film is especially exciting for me to present through the Center Film Festival because it's the kind of film that does both. It's the kind of film that you can literally just sit back, relax, watch, feel slightly entertained by this dramatic story of a group of youth fighting the mammoth, the government for dropping the ball on some truly important issues to them as youth and to our future. Or you can actually get engaged and get inspired by both the filmmaker's approach to telling the story and also the commitment and passion of people in the film who were pushing forward for what they believe. And this is exactly why I've invited Peter Boger from the Sustainability Institute here at Penn State to talk about ways in which that could happen. This is the kind of film you could bring into a classroom. This is the kind of film you could put into a theater. It's the kind of film that you can have peer-to-peer discussions over, which Peter, I'm sure, will talk about. And then think about ways in which this kind of work that was put in to this journey by these kids over years could inspire you. So with that, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the two people on our panel. I've mentioned Peter Boger from the Sustainability Institute and the director of the film, Youth v. Gov, who actually I think has a PhD in science and documentary filmmaker, award-winning cinematographer and storyteller. Some of the awards are displayed right there, thanks to Zoom. We don't just get to meet the filmmaker, we also see some of their stuff. I would love to hear what the two of you are going to talk about with regard to the film. I'm going to slip off a little. My name is Pearl. I'm the artistic director of the Center Film Festival. And I will pop back in about 20 minutes or so. So it might seem a little creepy that I jump back onto your live streams, but that is what's going to happen. And then we'll take your questions. If you have any, please put them in the chat. And if you haven't seen the film yet, feel free to listen. This will get you inspired. And if you have, I think this will be really informative and exciting. So with that, Peter Boger and Christy Cooper.
Thanks so much, Pearl.
Yeah, thank you, Pearl. And Christy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real privilege and honor to talk with you. And thank you for making this film. It's just really inspiring and empowering. And I'm kind of curious, we actually at Penn State, this is how I met Pearl. We had the great privilege of bringing Isaac Vergun, one of the plaintiffs in the film, to Penn State back in February of 2020. It's hard to wrap my mind around because literally it was like right before everything shut down for the pandemic. But I know it was inspiring hearing him talk, and I'm curious how you got involved with the Juliana case. Where was your point of entry? Was it to individual plaintiffs, or was it to the story overall?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks so much for being here, Peter. I'm really excited to talk with you. So my entry with the story actually goes back 10 years. So those of you who have seen the film already know who Julia is. She is the kick-ass attorney who is leading this case. And she founded an organization called Our Children's Trust back in 2010 to represent young people in climate litigations. And in 2011, Our Children's Trust formed a partnership with Witness, which is a social justice human rights organization based out of New York. It's Peter Gabriel's organization that uses video for social change. And I came on board to that partnership and to that project to help create a series of 10 short films that was focused on young people at the time who were suing their state governments over climate change. And so we did these 10 short films. They were not based on, the stories were not about the lawsuits. The stories were very focused on the young people's climate impacts and their personal stories of harm. We were able to use them in the courts as evidence because they were based on their standing declarations. They were hand delivered to President Obama. Lisa Jackson at the time, who was the head of the EPA, even requested to purchase them, maybe not knowing at the time that she was a defendant on the federal case. So, I kind of through those couple of years of working on that campaign, developed relationships with some of the plaintiffs, namely Kelsey Juliana, who is now the named plaintiff on this case, and Chutescott Martinez, who sued the state of Colorado, and Jamie Lynn Butler from the Navajo Nation, who sued the state of Arizona, and also developed a very good relationship, trusting relationship with the legal team. And so I think when they filed this lawsuit in 2015, and I approached them after their first court win in 2016, in the spring of 2016, Julia had seen me work with these young people. She knew that I had embraced these human rights principles of filmmaking, working with witness and working with young people. And I'd also invested a lot of time over those years of trying to understand as much as I could about climate litigation and the public trust doctrine and the basis of these cases. So I was well poised. I was in the right position to take on this story, although I had no idea what the journey would actually look like.
Well, it's interesting you talk about like how you kind of came to build trust with Julie, because I think that was one of the things I was thinking about watching this film. You are incredibly intimately involved in all the kind of behind the scenes and the practice moot trials and the backyard conversations before we go in the courtroom, and that is an incredibly privileged position as a filmmaker, because you're in some ways like you're telling your story, but you have to kind of take a backseat to this legal case that's happening. And was that ever tricky to navigate in terms of, I want to get this shot or I want to get this footage because I'm trying to tell a story, versus I need to be respectful of the legal process of these defendants? What were some of the challenges around navigating that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think as coming from a filmmaker perspective, we're taught in film school to never turn the camera off. And, and to those moments where you least expect it, you might find those gems. But when you have this privilege of being able to document something as important as a constitutional lawsuit, there are responsibilities, from the filmmaker's perspective of how to go about doing that. And there certainly were moments where it was inappropriate for me to have the camera on, or where I could have put the plaintiffs and their standing in jeopardy, or, I don't even know what those situations necessarily would have been, but there was a lot of, caution that I took on my end to always be respectful of making sure that it was okay to be filming what I was filming, having those permissions. Also working with plaintiffs, not only were they young people and many of them minors, but they're plaintiffs in a lawsuit. And so there was a lot of thinking, that had to go into what's appropriate, when do I turn the camera off? And in order to maintain that trust, and for Julia to really know that even if she's not present, even if the attorneys aren't there, that their plaintiffs are still in safe hands, and that I was going to, above all, protect the validity and the integrity of the lawsuit.
And I mean, these students, you obviously did develop this great relationship with them, and they're incredibly savvy youth. They have their own goals and their own ways that they want to advance change. And I'm curious if they've stayed involved with the film and how they're using it or how you're working with them. I mean, I know the lawsuit is, spoiler alert for those of you who have not seen the film, sort of been dismissed, but maybe still in sort of not. I mean, the Ninth Circuit dismissed the dismissal, but then it's sort of been appealed to the Supreme Court, and there's talk of trying to negotiate with the Biden administration. But yeah, how are the students and the youth in the film staying engaged with the film?
Yeah. Well, importantly, I'd like to clarify where the case is first, and then I can answer.
Okay, please. Yes.
Yeah. So the case right now, the film ends, and we are very soon going to be changing the last graphics to update it. But the film ends on the split Ninth Circuit Court decision, with the Ninth Circuit Court ruling that the plaintiffs' constitutional rights have been violated, and that the government caused this harm. And where they got hung up on was with the declaratory, or they got hung up on the oh, my mind's blanking right now. They
standing, or
no, not on, well, the standing, you have to prove these three elements of standing in order to have full standing, right? You have to prove that you were harmed, prove that the defendant caused the harm, and prove that the courts can provide that relief. And where the courts got hung up on is on the injunctive relief that the plaintiffs were seeking, where they were asking the courts to mandate that the government implement climate recovery plans. And they don't say that, the courts didn't understand how they were supposed to be able to do that, even though we have amazing precedents with Brown v. Board of Education, where their first ruling in 1954 was first that declaratory relief, simply stating that the plaintiffs had a constitutional right and it was being violated. It wasn't until 1955 that the courts were able to provide that injunctive relief of actually enforcing and mandating these schools to desegregate. So it's very similar. They're not, the courts didn't actually do the desegregation, but they mandated that the schools in these states had to figure out how to desegregate. And so in the case of Juliana, the plaintiffs are asking the same thing, but because the courts got hung up on that injunctive aspect, they've asked for the courts to allow them to amend their complaint so that it's more in line with declaratory relief that they're seeking. So they had a hearing in June. We're right now waiting for Judge Aiken's decision on that. We're very, very hopeful that she's going to rule in their favor, which would then send the case back on track to go to trial. At the same time, she also ordered the Biden administration to begin settlement negotiations, confidential settlement negotiations with the plaintiffs and the legal team. Those have been ongoing since June, although I think there has been very little effort by the Biden administration to come to the table with any kind of settlement. So that's kind of where we're at right now. It's kind of an exciting moment because we're waiting for Judge Aiken for her ruling, which we're very, very hopeful that this puts the case back on track for trial. In terms of the youth's involvement, I mean, obviously they're still very involved in the case as plaintiffs. They've been involved in the settlement negotiations. This is their case, and they are leading the charge in terms of how they want the legal team to handle their case. In terms of the film, it's been really fun through the festival circuit to continue to work with them and, to do things like this with Q&As and panels. We've started some community screenings as well that many of them have been engaged in, podcasts, various media interviews. So in fact, right now, Vic Barrett, who's in the film, he's right now at COP for the coming weeks and is hoping to have some great conversations there and to build more awareness about the Juliana case in the international community. So some of them are very busy with school and are trying to lead their lives and continue their lives because this has been incredibly disruptive and taken over their childhoods. But they all are still in it to win it.
Well, and I mean, thinking about their power, and you were talking about them like disrupting their childhoods, but also I think one of the things that I've found so moving and powerful about their story and that you tell so well is there's a tendency often, I remember Greta Thunberg being righteously indignant when she was being kind of patronized, I never get that word right, by politicians in the UN who are kind of, we're so inspired by you youth and you're a good generation. And she was like, you're just passing the buck. You're saying like, yeah, when you get in charge 20, 25, 30 years from now, you're going to actually do something, but nicely done, but we're still in charge. And she was saying, kind of righteously, no, like, if we're going to be empowered, then we need to take action away from you because you're not doing the work. And I think the whole point of the Juliana case is the same idea. Like, we're as youth being harmed today, and if you will not take action, we will. And I think that's one of the things I was so excited about it with this story is so often it does seem like we tell the youth of today, you're inspiring us for when you're in charge tomorrow. And these plaintiffs have kind of given up their childhood to say, we're going to take control today, not tomorrow. And I don't think we hear that story enough. And I'm curious if you have other stories that you could think of that you've been working on, or other stories that we could kind of share with people about showing the kind of the power of students not to wait till tomorrow, but to act now today? Because you end the film with that kind of call. How are you holding your federal, your state, your city governments accountable?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head that I think this generation is pretty much fed up with the pats on the back and telling them they're doing a great job and they're so inspiring and blah blah blah. I mean, I think we're experiencing that right now at COP. Seeing seeing really the willingness or the unwillingness of our world leaders to actually act urgently on this issue. So I think this is the time for those young people to not only stand up and make their voices heard, but it's time for people to move out of the way and to let them have a seat at the table. To bring their needs and their desires and their hopes for their future, also to be part of the solution. They need to be invited to have that space and to be a part of the solution as we move forward. And I guess one really great example that I can think of is the city of Eugene a few years ago passed the first climate recovery ordinance of its kind in the country, and it was entirely youth led. It was youth who brought this forward to their city commissioners. The mayor was incredibly supportive and helpful, and workshopped with them on how to testify before their elected officials. They were incredibly mobilized and motivated, and worked with the scientists, worked with the policymakers to really draft a really strong climate recovery ordinance that was then passed and is being held accountable. Each year the city has the mandate that they have to prove and show how they're reducing their carbon emissions and moving off of fossil fuels. So these are some of those local, and those initiatives now are spreading, throughout the country. This is something really where folks can locally get engaged. I mean, there's beautiful stories of young people, approaching their school boards and demanding that their schools get off of fossil fuels and turn to renewable energy in order to power their schools, and getting solar panels onto their school roofs. And these are all, we need the systemic change from our government and from the top down, but we also need all of these local grassroots movements happening at the same time, because that's actually where those changes and solutions will need to be implemented. So I just would encourage young people to get involved in, like, at whatever level they can, to be a part of this. And there's state cases right now in the U.S. I live in Montana, and we have a case here. It's a youth-led climate litigation. Our Children's Trust is supporting these young people, and the case is actually going to go to trial. And we need more young people here in Montana that are standing up, and there's amicus briefs that they can sign, Friends of the Courts letters that they can sign, that they can get involved with other youth organizations that can do the same. So there's lots of ways for young people to plug into this government accountability equation.
I think you make an important point about the local level being oftentimes where it's going to be implemented, and that we often tends to only focus on national politics and our media or whatever. But for students, they have real power. And then one of the things we try to stress here at Penn State is the fact that Penn State has 24 campuses across Pennsylvania, and our budget is bigger than the GDP of 40 nations in the world. So we really are a huge institution, and students here at Penn State have power if they can change the actions of Penn State, which currently has a carbon emissions reduction task force meeting to say, how do we change what we're doing here at Penn State? And the student voices could be, there's 100,000 in our system. They could be incredibly powerful in shifting that conversation. And also too, in Pennsylvania, we have the rare privilege that our Constitution actually has Article 1, Section 22, which says that you have a right to clean air, pure water, and the preservation of the natural and aesthetic values of the environment. So it's written into our Constitution, which gives incredible legal power for those kinds of cases.
And students have been really successful across the U.S. with these divestment campaigns with their universities as well. And I mean, I think we have to hit it at all levels. And we definitely understand that not everybody can be a plaintiff in a lawsuit, but there's so many other ways that we can hold our leaders accountable on this.
I think one of the other things too, thinking beyond the legal, is I know talking with a lot of youth, both at the university level and below, one of the things I find with climate change so often is that the stories that we tell around climate change and around our future either inspire hopelessness or paralysis, because they are stories of apocalypse, and that is the primary language in which we're talking about our future. And I always, kind of come back to a quote that, if a man's convinced he's going to die tomorrow, he'll probably find a way to make that happen. And if all we're hearing is it's doom, then that doesn't empower anybody. And so one of the things, again, what's so great about this film is it's not a story of hopelessness. It's a story of action, but it's a story of collective action, which again, I think is another problem that we have so often. The stories we tell environmentally are like, what can you do to save the planet? And it's, you can recycle, you can take a shorter shower, and that's not the action that's actually going to inspire the kind of hope. And what we see in the film is just how much the students, like one of them talks about, I got brothers and sisters, I'm an only child, but here I am with other people going through the same thing. And so I'm curious how we can use, in your opinion, as a storyteller, more stories to kind of build that collective action.
Yeah, you brought up several points in there that I love. We tried really hard. I didn't want this film to be a story of doom and gloom. And while these plaintiffs are all experiencing their individual harms, I mean, horrible things happened in the course of making this film, to, Jaden's home being flooded and Levi having to evacuate from several hurricanes and droughts and fires. And I mean, it's really, it does feel apocalyptic, but, this story, we really wanted the narrative to be focused on, first of all, why we're in this problem, who caused it, and what that solution needs to be. And we've seen so many films about the science of climate change, and we've seen so many films about the harms of climate change. And those films have all led to where we are today, and they were important. And I'm very grateful that our film can stand on the shoulders of those films. But I think what Youth VGov, the new story that Youth VGov is telling, is that, this is not about our individual actions for sustainability, which are important, and we should all be engaged in those actions because our lives will just be so much better for doing that. But it's not going to solve the problem. It's not going to turn the ship in the right direction if we don't have those systemic changes that we need from our government to really get us off of fossil fuels. They locked us into a fossil fuel-based energy system decades ago, and we all have been feeding it. Through subsidies, through permitting, through all of the support that the government throws at the fossil fuel industry. And without shifting that, it doesn't matter. I mean, I know it does. I know it's a hard thing to hear for some people, but it literally does not matter what I as an individual do with my own carbon footprint if we're not able to get off of fossil fuels in terms of our energy system. So, we're hoping to kind of change that narrative and really empower folks to, rather move towards holding their elected officials accountable, move towards exposing where all of this support is going, and exposing, how much we're giving and contributing to the fossil fuel industry, who actually is making the buck, and what an expense that is to us, not only in terms of our taxes, like how much of our taxes every year go to subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, but also the health cost and the cost of not mitigating climate change is going to be so large as we moved forward in the future. We're going to be spending so much more on rebuilding and the devastations just of cleaning up after these climate devastations. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, so I think these narratives, I think shifting the narrative is really important. And, I think that's what we were really hoping to do. And also to show that, these young people are part of this story and they're part of this case, not because they were activists, not because they were eloquent speakers, not because they loved the media and were great in front of the camera, but because they all had individual harms. And through the course of these 6 years of being plaintiffs, they've found their voice and they've learned how to speak in front of a camera and to use that to their advantage. But they represent, this incredible diversity that we have in the United States, and they represent the youth who actually are in these marginalized communities that are going to be most disproportionately impacted by climate change.
And I think one final question, and you kind of brought up the kind of question of systemic change, and I'm forgetting his name. One of the plaintiffs, the one who's sitting with his family at the beach at the end and trying to convince. Yeah, and you show him in one of his public speeches talking about the fact that it's the same systems that cause climate harm are the same systems that cause racial injustice and environmental injustice, and that these issues are kind of interconnected. And I think so often we tend to treat big issues in this country as, oh, I'm working on climate, you're working on Black Lives Matter, you're working on gender equality, and they are all actually interconnected, and there's power in that interconnection because there's solidarity across movements, and you make the tent bigger for more people to kind of get behind your cause. So I think you were saying it's important to kind of build that kind of systemic voice amongst our youth, but amongst everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, the intersectionality of climate justice is huge, and it does give a voice to everybody.
And I see Pearl is back with us.
Am I? Oh, okay. I can't see myself, which is totally fine with me. Yes, thank you so much. I did want to say, I wanted to say a lot of the things you've already said. I appreciate what you were saying about following someone coming to their activism at any age. I think that was really powerful. And a lot of our audience are students who are in various different departments throughout the university, throughout Pennsylvania. And I think there are many inroads to be able to appreciate how we can make change, and in our particular cases through film, right? And I'm wondering if you have any advice. I know it's a terrible question, but it actually leads to really fantastic answers on how people can frame a narrative that could potentially inspire action from what you've learned, at least through your incredible experience.
Well, I think the framing, I think putting humans at the center of the story, I think is really important. And I think just taking climate change films as an example, for so long we were focused on the polar bear and the glaciers, and it was very like factual and scientific. And I think what's really resonating with folks are really truly these human stories and that human connection, and we as humans psychologically connect with that. So I think the framing of any topic, whether it's about racial justice or gender equity or economic equality, all of those stories, in my opinion, need to be focused around a human narrative.
Which you actually did. We're based in Pennsylvania, as you know, with your the Trust series, when you had Ashley Funk on there, who actually is an activist right here in our own backyard. Maybe you could tell us a little about that episode, which people can find on a website. It's easy to watch. These are very accessible pieces of content that you've created that people can watch and get inspired by. Tell us a little about that and about Ashley.
Yeah, so this goes back to Peter's original question of how I got involved, and Ashley's story was one of those 10 stories that we did. She's from Pennsylvania, grew up in coal country, and she has a twin sister, and they grew up in poverty and playing on the coal ash mountains in their backyard. And her story is just incredible. She went off to Wesleyan with a full ride scholarship, and she decided to come back to Pennsylvania, to her own community, to work. And now she's the executive director of a nonprofit organization, working within communities, transitioning off of fossil fuels and supporting those workers in that just transition. And she's been an absolute just inspiration for me. I was lucky enough to do the climate reality leadership training with her in Pittsburgh years ago. And yeah, there's just, you have in Pennsylvania some amazing young activists and people who really want to stay within their communities and help their communities. And it's really amazing to see.
Yeah.
And
Peter, do you have any?
Folks can go to my website, barrelmakerproductions.com. The trust shorts are on there. And I would recommend, they're short, they're easy to watch. Definitely great things for schools to watch and to share. And people can definitely reach out to me and I can help with that as well.
Yeah. Peter, did you have any questions that you wanted to end with?
No, I mean, I think I would just a comment, following on what Christy and you were just talking about is, that's the perfect kind of opening. I think a lot of times there's the thing called the Yale Climate Maps, in which they do surveys county by county, you can see, of people's opinions on all sorts of different climate questions. And the vast majority, the question of, is climate change happening? Is it harming it? If you actually look, the vast majority of Americans totally agree with that. But then when you look at actions and say, how many people are you talking about climate change on a regular basis? And it's below 30% in most of the country, where everybody's knows climate change is happening, but we don't actually talk about it with other people. And I think having stories like the series Christy's talking about, like this film, that you can take and use as an opening and say, let's watch this story together, let's talk about it, I think is such a powerful first step, because people do care, and you cannot have gone through this last summer anywhere in this country and not seen the harms of climate change, but we're not talking about it. And I think these are the kinds of conversations we need to have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, ooh, we said it at the same time too, Christy. What are you working on next?
We're really busy still with Youth v Gov, despite having the film finished. We are launching an impact campaign that we've been working really hard on for the last couple of years, strategizing and researching and trying to figure out the best way to plug this film in. So our impact campaign is entirely focused on government responsibility on the climate crisis. We really want to engage and support young people in that in particular, and also, motivate the older generations to get behind these young people and support them. So we have some national work that we're doing in terms of building awareness about this case, which really has the potential to really shift our government's climate policy. And we also are excited to, in the second year of our impact campaign, to hone in on a few states that we have identified as tipping point states that we would like to work in, where this film can serve as a tool to help communities, to help local nonprofits on the ground with their actions on government accountability. And Pennsylvania is actually one of the states that we're very interested in working in. So that's going to be the focus of a lot of my work over the next couple of years. We're currently fundraising for that, excited to be putting together a team that we can put out and do that work. And also a lot of behind the scenes, on the Hill government engagement work that we're also doing with the film. So I think until I'm able to send out all the minions to do that work, I'm going to be pretty busy with that. But I am excited about developing some new projects with my producing partner Olivia Aneman as well. So in our very little free time, we are trying to find some creative space to begin working on some new projects as well.
That's excellent. Great. Well, obviously, we want you to keep us posted on that. And I saw Peter taking some notes, so I'm pretty sure you're going to be in touch with our Sustainability Institute And we here at the College of Communications, we also, we're in conjunction with the Sustainability Institute, are looking at the communication side of sustainability, which I think you fit perfectly into as a content creator and filmmaker. So definitely be in touch with us, and our entire Commonwealth campus, which is all over Pennsylvania. And we have activists throughout, which I'm sure Peter can tell you more about, and whoever's listening as well can reach out to our Sustainability Institute if you need more resources or information.
Absolutely.
We've added some to our film page. I also want to encourage people, and yourself as well, Christy, if you haven't already seen, we have a number of films that also deal with these aspects that you've just brought to light, of telling the story around climate change and activism through the point of view of an individual person, or people connecting with other people and trying to make connections between climate change and everything else that it affects or is affected by. And one of them is The Ant and the Grasshopper by Raj Patel and his team. And that'll be on Saturday. So people are welcome to watch that. They can watch some of the other films online as well. And your film is coupled with Homeland Wetland, which looks more at that larger corporate question and how that affects and is affected by climate change in Louisiana. So there are other, there is this internal conversation going on between these films, and we would love to, we hope that that engages more dialogue, more conversation, and as you said, more change on the legislative side of things as well. Thank you so much. We so appreciate you being here. Peter, as always, it's incredible to have you on the Center Film Festival team and engaging so many interesting filmmakers about their work. And we will see all of you either at the next live stream or at an in-person event. And until then, be well, stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Sounds good.
Bye-bye.